Hello everyone and welcome back to Classic Dune. Today I'm going to be discussing the strengths and strategies of House Moritani. Now, of all the expansion factions, I think I've seen Moritani be listed as one of the favorites. During playtesting, everyone wanted to try them, and after release I've seen a lot of polls where, of the expansion factions, Moritani was rated the most favorite. And it's for good reason, because they are a very exciting and interesting faction, and they're just cool. So let's look at the at start, and it's 6 forces in any unoccupied territory after all other factions set up, and 12 spice. Now, I'm going to go on the record here, and I'm going to say this is one of the, if not the best, starting positions of any faction. It's really only rivaled by House Atreides and House Harkonnen, and they of course start with 10 forces in their respective city stronghold, Carthage and Arakeen, and 10 spice. So compared to this, that's 10 forces on the board and 10 spice, so it's 20 spice worth. This setup is 18 spice worth, since it's 12 spice and 6 forces. So it's really good. And just the fact that even though it's less value, even though because you get to choose which territory it is, I think that makes it really good. If there's no Atreides or Harkonnen, you can start in the stronghold instead of them, or you could go in a different stronghold, or you could even just start in the Polar Sink if there's nobody there. I mean, or you could be crazy and start in some random desert or rock territory, because it does just say territory. Now, let's go to their advantages, and they've got one of the flashiest advantages in the entire game, and that is terror tokens. They resort to terrorism. So the Moritani is going to have their 6 terror tokens, and these are essentially placed down onto the board in strongholds, face down. So every Mentat pause phase, they get to place 1 terror token of their choice into a stronghold on the board, and it stays hidden. Moritani can of course always look at it to check what it is in case they forgot, but nobody else will know what it is unless someone maybe plays a truth trance against you. But of course you can only ask a yes or no question. So if you guess the right one and Moritani says yes, you know what it is, but otherwise you're just ruling out certain possibilities. Now, what these terror tokens do is when any player has forces enter them, either shipping or moving, including advisors, Moritani is going to be able to choose to reveal the token. So they don't have to, they're not forced to. Maybe if it's the robbery token that lets you steal half of someone's spice, and a poorer faction, like maybe the Fremen, moves in, you might not want to trigger it then, so you can leave it unrevealed. Now, there are 2 notable exceptions to this. So the first one is a little bit simpler. It's just the fact that Bene Gesserit advisors will not trigger this. So actually, let's get... So the Bene Gesserit in advance, they have a spiritual advisor side where they don't affect the board. So let's say that there is a terror token here in Carthage. If the BG flips these forces to fighters from advisors, they technically have forces in the territory now, but that does not trigger the terror token because thematically and visually the forces were already there. The other exception is if the Tleilaxu managed to call a face dancer. So let's say that they even call the face dancer on the Bene Gesserit in a fight, and then they go and they take their 5 Tleilaxu forces and they replace the Bene Gesserit forces. This is the other thing that does not trigger a terror token. And again, thematically, though not visually, the forces were there the whole time. So they were Bene Tleilax forces in disguise. They didn't enter the territory, so the only chance that that Moritani would have to trigger it is when the BG originally shipped in or moved. So that's that. But any other occurrence, as long as they're entering the territory, that will trigger it. Now, what do these terror tokens do? Well, the first one, we get off to a pretty explosive start, is atomics. And this one has all forces in the territory go to the tanks, and then the atomics aftermath token is placed in the territory, and that means that no forces may ever ship into the territory, even Fremen. So if you want to get into a territory where atomics was used, you cannot ship in. You have to move in from a nearby territory or an adjacent one. Maybe there's a lot of smoke or radiation or something, and the guild Highlander just cannot approach that area for whatever reason, but you cannot ship into that territory for the rest of the game. There is no way to remove or counteract this effect. So it can be pretty crazy. Now, the other effect of this is that, of course, as we all know, the convention strictly forbids the use of atomics, especially against human life. So there you got a little bit of sanctions imposed upon you by the Landsraad, and your hand limit as the Moritani and your allies is reduced by 1. Now, what does this mean? It means that whoever your current ally is can hold 1 less card. So let's say the Moritani detonates atomics and the Bene Gesserit are their ally. Well, the Bene Gesserit now have a reduced hand limit in addition to the Moritani. However, let's say that the Moritani blow up atomics while they're solo. It applies to just them. Now, later on, let's say somebody else allies with the Moritani. This penalty gets retroactively applied to them. So let's say Guild allies with the Moritani after atomics have been detonated. Guild now has a reduced treachery card hand limit, and they all have to discard cards if they exceed this. Now, this goes away, however, if you unally with the Moritani. So however you manage to get the sanctions on you and the reduced hand limit, you can remove it by unallying with them, which, makes a certain degree of sense. They've done some horrible things, and you can distance yourself and plea your innocence to the Landsraad, and then you're off the hook. They really want the Moritani. And they can never remove this penalty. This will apply for the rest of the game. It's a very, very permanent token to trigger. So the next one is assassination. So very simply, you choose a random leader from that player, send it to the tanks, and collect spice. This is very similar to the residual poison Rishas treachery card, except that instead of applying it before battles are planned, you apply it when the token is triggered. And key difference that makes this one very good is that you gain spice for the leader's death. Residual poison does not have this feature, so it's great for generating spice. You'll usually get at least 2, sometimes even more. And the symbol on this is a little callback to the book Paul of Dune, where the Moritani use hexagonal bladed discs that are disguised inside of a certain item that I will avoid saying to avoid spoilers. But let's just say that these are a nasty piece of business, and you'll be lucky if only one of your leaders die if this was actually used. Now, the next token is called Extortion. So you just gain 5 spice from the spice bank placed in front of your shield. This is just like a bribe, so it's collected during the Mentat pause phase of that turn. And then you regain the terror token unless any one player in Storm Order pays you 3 spice. So what this means is that you go in Storm Order, you say, will you pay, will you pay, will you pay, until somebody says yes and pays Moritani the money. Next up is going to be robbery. I mentioned this earlier. This one lets you steal half the spice rounded up of the player who triggers the token. So this can be really great if you trigger it on an Emperor or a Guild or a Tleilaxu in the late game. Although it's also pretty funny if you trigger it on someone you expect to be rich, like the Emperor, and then it's like, all right, here you go, 3 spice. That's half of what I had. And it's like, oh, damn, I really wish I chose the other option, which is you can choose to take the top card of the treachery deck. And you can even do this if you're full. You'll just have to discard back down to your hand size. And more often than not, honestly, this happens to be the better effect, because it's a card that the Ixians don't know about unless they placed a card on the top of the deck last bidding phase, and also Atreides don't know about. So this is actually a pretty strong effect, and I usually choose this one over the spice because, I mean, that's a whole token that you're using, and you might not get that much unless it's an emperor. Usually they're pretty rich. Next up is going to be sabotage. So this one lets you draw a random treachery card from that player and discard it if possible. To my knowledge, this is just in case there's some new effect or rule change in the future. It's just careful wording. So you just discard the treachery card. There's no way for you to keep it or anything like that. But the cool part about this is it lets you give that player a treachery card of your choice from your hand. So this is good in two ways. One of them, actually three technically. The first one is obviously to get rid of bad cards from your hand. Maybe you got a cheap hero, or a worthless card, or some green special that you don't want to use. For whatever reason it is, you can give them that card, get it out of your hand. Now this can be brutal if that player happens to have 4 treachery cards, and then you can give this to them after they've discarded one, and now they're still full. So unless they get into a battle or discard a card, they can't bid next turn. It can be pretty tricky. And the last one is probably the craziest one, is that if you're allied with the Bene Gesserit, you can use the sabotage token to give them a specific combat card, and then later on you use the voice and you force them to play it. So maybe you do something completely crazy, like you give them a shield, you voice them to play it, and then you use a lasgun to blow them up. Like, insane amount of interesting plays you could do with this. Or even you give them a harass and withdraw, and then you voice them to play it. I don't even know if that's legal. Might not be, depending on the wording of the voice, but, you know, who's to say? Next token up is Sneak Attack. This one's really good. It just lets you send up to 5 of your forces into reserves into that territory from reserves at no cost. And now it is subject to storm and occupancy rules, so if there's already 2 people there, you probably shouldn't trade the token because it won't do you any good. And if somehow it's a territory under the storm that someone has moved or shipped into, the good example would be if it's in Siege Tabor and the storm is covering it. One of the abilities of the Fremen is that they can ship directly into a territory under storm, and they just have to suffer half losses like normal. But they can ship directly into a territory under storm, so the Fremen could get into Siege Tabor while it contains the sneak attack token and it's under storm. If you choose to trigger it, which you probably shouldn't, you're not going to be able to add any forces there. Now, here's one really cool thing, which is that it says send. Send up to 5 forces. It doesn't say anything about shipping, which means that you can use this on a territory that's affected by the Atomic's Aftermath, which is just crazy, because the Atomic's Aftermath tokens says that no forces may ever ship into this territory, but not send. So you could pull some crazy thing where you nuke Habanya Siege, and now it's really hard to get into, because unlike Carthage or Arakeen, or even Siege Tabor, there's no other stronghold within movement range of it. To get into Habanya from now on, you'd have to ship directly into the desert and then move in, which would make it very expensive. So probably only maybe 3 or 4 forces would be going in there, and that's 8 spice worth. Then you trigger this token, let's see here. You trigger the sneak attack token, and now you get to send 5 forces for free. That's probably more than they'll have, and if it's not enough, if you're still yet to go in turn order, you could even reinforce them at great cost, of course, because you'd have to go into a sand territory. But still, this is really nice. It's a really cool sort of combo you can pull off with this token. So those are all of the terror tokens, and they provide a little bit of interesting gameplay by not revealing them. I've actually had a lot of success in games by forcing people to bribe me not to trigger tokens. And there's all sorts of interesting deals you can do with this because the Moritani terror tokens, it's it's something of value you can offer to someone that doesn't inherently cost you any spice. It's valuable. It's like how Fremen can sell storm knowledge or Atreides can sell card knowledge. Well, you can sell the privilege of moving into a terror token without it being triggered. So you could say, oh, hey, you want to go here? One spice and I won't trigger it for you. Or I like to get creative, like, hey, five spice and Arakeen you will never trigger a terror token going into Arakeen. Or for the next 3 turns, you get terror token immunity. I won't trigger one on you. You could do all sorts of very creative deals. It's really interesting. Or, as long as you send at least 5 forces, I won't trigger a terror token. You can get really creative. That's the best part about Dune deal making with it being binding, is that you can make all of these weird deals that, in most games, if it wasn't binding, nobody would ever agree to it. But in Dune, because it's confirmed, it's locked in, you cannot break it, there's some interesting space for deal making potential. And it's a little bit, it doesn't come up immediately to mind that you can do that. It's not like the Tleilaxu ability to revive other people's leader early for them and at a certain price. That's a very obvious deal making potential of, discounts and early revivals, free leaders. But this, you almost feel like you're charging like a toll to get into the strongholds. It's pretty funny. And it's especially nice if you know it's a really strong token, like atomics or like assassinate leaders, and you know that your threat actually has some teeth behind it. Now, another reason why you might get value out of not triggering tokens is their next ability, enemy of my enemy. And this is a really cool ability. It's probably one of the strongest in the entire game. And it says when a faction, other than ECAS, because they hate each other, would trigger a terror token, you may offer to enter into an alliance with that faction before the token is revealed. If the faction accepts, you are now both allied. Breaking existing alliances, either or both of you were in. Very important line here. The terror token is not revealed, returns to supply. If that faction does not accept, the terror token must be revealed. So, this ability is crazy because it's one of the few ways for a faction to enter into or break alliances outside of the Nexus phase. And, depending on whether you're playing basic or if you've got the Sand Trout or the Discovery token Spice Blow cards in the deck, Nexuses can be weird. You might pull all 6 Shai Hulud cards, there are 6 of them, in the first 2 or 3 turns, and you'll have to wait until turn 8 when the Spice deck reshuffles until you have even the possibility of getting a Nexus again. Well, as Moritani, you'll never be stuck in an alliance you don't like. And you'll also never be solo if there's someone you'd like to ally with. Now, this actually gives Moritani a good reason not to ally in a normal Nexus phase. Or even to ally in a Nexus phase willy-nilly. So the first one. If there's Nexus cards in play, I would suggest you don't ally in a Nexus phase unless nobody's making an alliance anyway. So if somebody's making an alliance, you know that if you stay solo, you'll get a Nexus card. I would say 9 times out of 10, the best play is to stay solo because you can get that Nexus card, you can see what it is, and if it's a good one, you can try to play it early and then enter into a Nexus with enemy of my enemy. Or if it's not so great, you could say, hey, I got to see what it was, it's not great, and now I still get to enter an alliance, which is what I wanted to do in the first place. It's fantastic. Now, if there are no Nexus cards in play, there's zero reason not to form an alliance when a Nexus comes up. And this is because, with enemy of my enemy, you won't be trapped in that alliance if, let's say, they have a bad battle and they lose a bunch of forces or leaders or cards, and it's just, alright, well, you're just dragging me down, we can't get a win together, but, oh damn, there's no Shai Hulud cards coming up, there's no Nexuses, so I'm stuck with you. Well, that's not the case with Moritani. They can always just try to put themselves in a good position and say, hey, we should ally up, go into this territory here, and weaken enemy of my enemy off this token. Fantastic ability, really strong, and it really lets you leapfrog between alliances. You'll never be stuck in a bad situation with respect to alliances. Their last basic ability is Duke Vidal. So, in this game, there is a 6th leader that could potentially belong to both Ikaz and Moritani, and this is Duke Pride Vidal. So you can notice that his leader disc is half Moritani blue and half Ikaz pink. And this is because he's a traitorous bastard. But he's only traitorous to the Moritani. He has no traitor card in the deck. So he can never be a traitor, and he can never be a face dancer. But he will switch sides at varying points in the game. The Ikaz can gain use of him with their Ikaz ambassador. And as Moritani, you can gain access to him if at the end of the shipping and movement phase you are in at least 2 battles in strongholds that do not involve Ikaz. So what this means is you can't be in a battle that is against Ikaz, including if Ikaz are co-occupied with their ally. But if you do fulfill this condition, you get Duke Pride Vidal for that turn, and you steal him from whoever currently possesses him. So, it includes Harkonnen Leader Steal, Tleilaxu Goal-laying. So if Duke Pride Vidal dies, and the Tleilaxu decide to, oh, well, I'll just buy him, and now I've got that 6 strength untradeable leader. Well, anytime you fulfill this condition, you just take him right back from them. And lastly, this also includes the Ikaz ability to gain Duke Vidal. The Ikaz ability specifically is when someone triggers the Ikaz ambassador, they can choose to gain him until he's played. So they would keep him for as many turns as they like until they play him. Well, with this, you just take Vidal, and now he's yours for that turn. Best part is, at the end of the turn, if he's still alive, he gets set aside. So the Ikaz don't get him back, the Tleilaxu don't get him back, and the Harkonnen don't get him back. He just goes right back to his out of play, next to the board, watching and waiting and seeing what's happening. So this ability, as you can tell, is highly favored towards the Moritani. Duke Vidal is favoring the Moritani in this game. They are not favoring Ikaz, even though he is technically the Duke of the, the Alaka province of Ikaz. Now, the next ability is the single advanced game advantage, which is assassinate leaders, not to be confused with assassination. This one says, when you lose a battle in which the opposing player had a leader disc, so this does not include cheap hero, that was not killed, and no traitor was called, you may reveal a traitor card for the same faction other than the leader you opposed. If they are not in the tanks, kill that leader and collect spice for them. During the Mentat pause, set the revealed card aside, face up as a marker, and then draw a new traitor card. This advantage can only be used once against each faction in the game. And that's what that marker is for. And you can still reveal a traitor card normally, but then this advantage is lost. So even if you have some other way of getting a new traitor card, this ability is gone. It's done. So the first thing you'll notice about this is that this is a way to use a traitor without having to call them normally. And it lets you reshuffle, recycle, and get a new traitor. So let's say you get a bad draw of traitors. You still have some hope of getting a new one that's maybe more impactful. So as an example here, let's just go ahead and draw 4 traitor cards, and we'll see that, wow, this was one of those bad draws I was talking about. So we do get a safe leader here, but these are all very low strength leaders. And just as an example here, I would suggest probably not choosing the Harkonnen, because this will be advanced if you're using this ability. And that means that Harkonnen will have the ability to steal your leader after a battle that they won. So definitely off the table. This one's off the table since you can't use it. Of these two, I would probably pick Wick here, not only because he's worth more spice, so you gain more by calling him, But he's also owned by the Benny Tlaylax. And there's two reasons why this is good. The first is that they're generally going to be more aggressive in the early game. They're going to try to get people to lose fights and lose forces to the tanks. So it shouldn't be too hard to put yourself in a situation where you can call this traitor. Or not call, but assassinate this leader with this traitor card. The second reason is that they're going to be very poor in the early game, which means that if you are able to lose a battle to them, they very likely will not have a weapon to kill your leader. So it's almost risk-free to a certain degree. Now, for similar reasons, Guild Rep might be good because they're generally going to be a little bit poor at the start of the game. But the main reason why you wouldn't want to pick Guild Rep is because the guild in advance is going to have the ability to ship and move when they wish. So if you go to try and fight them, the guild is going to be very risk averse. They're going to want to keep themselves strong for the entire game, so they will probably just take their turn after you and leave, and you won't be able to fight them. So for that reason, Wick here is the best choice. And that was actually a pretty good example. Got a good number of explanations out of that one. So now let's say you're able to call Wick, use him with the Assassinate Leader's ability. What you'll do next is you will get a replacement traitor card. And oh, brutal. There's another good learning point, is that if you get your own leader, this ability is now useless. Unless you have some other way of getting a new traitor. Like, for example, the Rouhani Decipher leader skill, or I think the Harkonnen Nexus card Secret Ally ability lets you do that. Let's double check actually. Why not? Yeah, so if you get one of your own traitor cards with this Assassinate Leader's ability, you might want to try drawing some Nexus cards, and maybe you get the Harkonnen one, you can get a new traitor, and because you didn't call the traitor normally, the ability is not lost, so you are still able to use it. Now, this one is pretty good because it's an extra bit of spice generation. It's pretty risk-free if you're smart with how you use it. And there's one little nuance to this, which is that there's a line here that says, if they are not in the tanks, kill that leader and collect spice for them. So what this means is that you can still use this ability if the leader has already been killed for whatever reason. You just don't get the spice for it. But it does mean that you're not stuck with that traitor card and you can still get a new one. And man, just the worst times in Dune is when you get a really good traitor, like you get Fade Rautha or Hazimir Fenrir or Staban Tuik, and then they get the leader killed on like the first or second turn, and you don't have any ability to call it at a later date. Well, not so for this, because you can still assassinate that leader somehow and get a new one. I mean, what I like to think about it is that it's Moritani claiming responsibility after the fact. It's like, oh, Atreides might have killed Fade, but it was actually us. We whispered in their ear, or, they hired one of our mercenaries to do it. I don't know, but it works. And it's nice because the advantage doesn't really lock you into a corner unless you get lucky and draw one of your own leaders, or one leader of a faction you've already assassinated, or you just get into the situation where the leader you have a traitor card for is played against you, and you have to debate whether or not you want to call it normally and lose the ability, or hold out hope that later on there'll be a better chance to call it. But overall, it's a very versatile ability, very easy to use, and usually in most cases, your second draw will not be this. You'll get something better like, yeah, that's a good card to get, because that's 5 spice if you can call it at the right time. So now let's look real quick at their alliance ability. And it is, when your ally loses a battle that had a winner, they may keep one treachery card they played in the battle that they would have been able to keep had they won. So there's 2 points here where the wording seems a little bit weird, but it's just to clear up any niche cases. First one is when your ally loses a battle that had a winner. And the one case at the moment where that could happen is if there's a lasgun shield explosion. If that happens, the card specifically states that nobody wins. And so that's a battle that did not have a winner. So if your ally plays a lasgun, and the opponent played a shield, they don't get to keep their lasgun, unfortunately. The other one is a treachery card they played in the battle that they would have been able to keep had they won. So, most weapons in the game, they've got, any day now, they've got this little tag here that says you may keep this card if you win this battle. So that's essentially meaning that if you lose the battle, you lose the card, but if you win the battle, you keep the card. And some of the special cards, like, let's say, the artillery strike, it says discard after use. This is the version that was included in the expansion 2 that's got the updated wording. The one that comes in expansion 1 doesn't say discard after use, and it also doesn't say you may keep the card if you win the battle. So cards like artillery strike, the other one is poison tooth, and then there's also stone burner from the richesse cache of expansion 2. All those cards that you can't keep if you win the battle, you cannot keep with the Moritani Alliance ability. There is one interesting exception, which is the Poison Tooth. So this card says, after seeing the battle results, you may choose not to use this weapon. If you win the battle and did not use this card, you may keep it. Otherwise, it is discarded. Now, from my memory, this is also a thing that was clarified in the expansion 2 version of the card. I think the expansion 1 version just says, after seeing the battle results, you may choose not to use this weapon. So this essentially means that if you're not using the Poison Tooth for its effect, it's still in your battle plan, so you'll still lose it if you lost the battle. But if you win and don't use the Poison Tooth, you get to keep it. Now, if you're allied to the Moritani and you have the Alliance ability, if you play the Poison Tooth in your battle plan and you're going to lose the battle no matter what, you might just say, you know what, I'm not going to bite down. I'm going to not use the card, which means that you get to keep it with the Alliance ability. So, a little bit of nuance, but this is actually a pretty strong Alliance ability. And this is actually one of the few Alliance abilities that is an actual ability the Moritani themselves don't have. So, the Moritani don't have an ability where when they lose a battle, they can keep a treachery card, but their ally does have that. And it's pretty nice. It lets you be very aggressive. It's especially good with a faction like the Bene Gesserit, who can go around voicing people not to play a shield, and then they play a slip tip, and then after the battle, even if they lose, they get to keep that weapon, and they can just go around being like a leader assassinating terrorist. It's pretty crazy. Or with the Bene Tleilax, who can, again, run around with a weapon and keep killing people and keep the weapon, and not have to buy another one later on. It's a pretty fun ability to use. It can also be quite clutch in those scenarios where, let's say, you and the Moritani have managed to get into all 5 strongholds, and you only need to win 4, but you have 5 battles. If you're the Moritani ally, you can go into your first battle and say, you know what, I'm going to play everything I've got, because even if I lose this, I can still keep the card, and I can still use it in my next battles later on that turn, and still potentially get the win. Very cool ability for a very cool faction. Moritani are overall one of the easier factions to play in the game that isn't an economy faction. Usually, economy factions, because they have a lot of spice, they're generally very easy to play, whereas more fighty factions like Moritani or Fremen or Harkonnen, they're a little bit trickier to play because you have inherent risk by getting into battles. So, last thing to look at with the Moritani is their leader set, and it is slightly above average, I would say. They have a 5 strength leader, which certain expansion factions like the Chom and the Ekaz do not have. And they've also got a pretty high set of leaders. So they have a 5 and 2 4s, which is pretty good. Most factions don't have such high strengths for their top 3 leaders. You look at Richesse, they still have a 5, but their next leaders are a lot lower. Or you look at Ekaz, who again doesn't even have a 5 strength leader. Or you look at Guild, so they have a 5, and then everyone else is a 3 or lower. They've also got He Resser, who is a swordmaster of Ginaz and was actually befriended by Duncan Idaho, so they know each other. And he got the better end of the stick because he's a 4 strength and Duncan's only a 2. I don't know how the hell that worked out, but maybe Duncan was skipping classes and drinking too much spice beer or whatever. But that's how it shook out at the end. Good leader selection, and they got a free arrival of 2. That's pretty good. So overall, the way I would say that you should play Moritani is you are all about not just getting into alliances. Most factions are about that because solo wins are tough to pull off. But you are all about making yourself a very marketable ally at all points of the game. So let's say as Moritani, you're able to pick up, a good set of cards in your hand. You got some weapons, you got some defenses, you got a good trader, and then you can get yourself into 2 strongholds, like so. This is a really great position for you to be in, because not only do you have a good hand, you've got good board presence, you're also a very marketable ally. And because the Moritani have the unique ability to ally basically at any time because of their enemy of my enemy advantage, that you always want to be marketable. You always want to be in a good position. So let's say you're playing the game and it's to ship in a movement phase. If you're going first, you probably want to take few risks. You want to just shore up your position. Maybe you ship a couple forces to your weakest stronghold. You don't want to make too many waves. You just want to chill. And then later on, you can look at your ideal ally, like say the Bene Gesserit. Maybe they're going last in Stormwater, and you say, hey, BG, why don't you go ahead and ship some forces into Carthage? We can enemy of my enemy. And not only is there one more person going after us in this little scenario here, but we already have the win attempt, and nobody going before us. I mean, maybe they expected it, but nobody going before us tried to stop us because we weren't allied yet. This is such a strong ability to be able to choose when you want to ally with someone, and not only that, but ally right when it's the best time, right before you're going to be battling to get the win. It's so strong. I've seen so many times in a game of Dune with Moritani where the table would be discussing the possibility of an alliance winning the game that hasn't even been formed yet, just because the Moritani are in a good position and they have terror tokens on the board, and there's another faction that makes an obvious ally, like the Bene Gesserit, or like an Emperor with a lot of strongholds, or a guild that hasn't shipped yet. Like, it's crazy just how on edge you can put the table. And I've actually seen a lot of win attempts that happen in retaliation to someone else's win attempt. So, like, let's say there's a Bene Gesserit Emperor alliance, they're going for the win, and then Moritani's sitting pretty in their 2 strongholds. They've got their good hand, they got their good board presence, and they say, hey, Guilt, let's not only stop the win attempt, let's go for one of our own. And then, enemy of my enemy, you're going for the win. If you win your battles, now you've all of a sudden not only not lost the game, but you've won it yourself. It's crazy. It's so interesting. It's so Dune. And it's very on theme for Moritani. So, main points of playing them well is going to be getting value out of your spice generating terror tokens. So, your tokens like assassination, like extortion, like robbery. You're going to want to get spice out of those, and you're also probably going to want to get assassinate leaders off at least once. You want to have a good amount of spice so that you can buy good cards. Maybe you even use robbery to get a card. You're going to want to use your spice to get on the board. There's a good opportunity to use sneak attack to get into a good stronghold. It's especially good if you haven't taken your turn yet to trigger sneak attack, because then you can take those 5 forces and you could even move them somewhere else and avoid the fight altogether. So you want to get cards, get forces, take very few risks, be risk averse, try not to go crazy with assassinate leaders. It can be a bit of a trap sometimes of it's like, oh man, I'm on my 4th trader now with assassinate leaders and I can still keep going for another one. You don't want to be losing fights, because losing fights ultimately doesn't win you the game. You want to be doing it in a measured way where the spice you get from calling the traitor, not calling the traitor, but assassinating the leader is more valuable than the chance of losing a leader and losing the forces that you've committed. So you want to use that once, maybe twice. Your third traitor card, you should probably be gunning to actually use it normally rather than to assassinate a leader. And then at that point, once you've got your good board state, you got your good cards, you got a good amount of spice backing you in your bank, you want to be a little coy about your alliance potential, but then you want to pick out who your ideal ally is. Maybe it's the Emperor, who's got some strongholds locked down. Maybe it's a Bene Gesserit, who's been killing it lately. Maybe it's a Harkonnen with a full hand and a lot of spice from killing people. You want to pick out your ideal ally. Maybe you even send them some messages beforehand, secret messages. You know, you text or you pull them out of the room, or if you're online, you message them. And you want to let them in, maybe. Or when it comes to their turn, you want to tell them what you're thinking, and you want to have a plan for winning the game. You don't want to just wait for someone to ship in and they go to a token. It's like, oh, hey, you want an enemy of my enemy? And then, let's just see where it goes. Because that is a token you placed on the board, intending for it to be used. And then now you're removing it for no effect. And you have to spend another turn later on placing it. You want to get value out of it immediately. You don't want to just be using enemy of my enemy just because you can. So when somebody is going to take their turn, you want to say, hey, you. Maybe be a little bit more polite. But you want to say, hey, maybe we can get a win here. Maybe you ship into Carthage. We can enemy of my enemy. I'll have 2. You can get into a 4th. And now we can potentially win. I think I can win my fights. I don't think faction Y that's going after us can stop us. Let's try for this. And it's especially devious because you can oftentimes try to sell a win attempt that is potentially more disastrous for your ally. So you can say, hey, let's go for this win attempt here, and you'll know full well that if you lose the fights and you don't win the game, it's probably going to be your ally who lost them. Or if you both lose, they lost more than you. It's especially good if your ally is going before you in turn order. That would mean that they fight their fights first. And if they do lose, you can realize that, hey, there's no win attempt anymore. I should probably not commit too heavily to my battles so I don't lose my good cards and I don't lose my good leaders and I don't have to spend a lot of spice doing it. So you can be really mean, honestly. You don't have to worry about getting stuck with a weak ally. You always know that if things go south, you can use enemy of my enemy later on to get into a better alliance. And that is the strengths and strategies of House Moritani. They're a crazy fun faction to play. They're really simple, but there's a lot you can do with them, with their abilities, with their terror tokens especially. There's so many fun strategies you can try out. And honestly, I have a blast even when I'm down in the dumps as them, because you can just stick atomics on Carthage and blow it up. It's great. Who doesn't love that? But yeah, that is House Moritani. Let me know what you think of these guys in the comments. Let me know what other factions you'd like to see a strengths and strategies video on in the future, or generally any video ideas you have. I'd love to hear them. I love this game. I love making content for it. And that's going to be all for me for now. I'll catch you guys later.